In this session, which is about change your mind, change your life, I'll be talking about changing your mind in relation to dying and how that can change our lives. As Jacinta mentioned, I'm drawing from my background in Buddhism and in spiritual care. I've been a Buddhist since the early 70s and studied with many Tibetan teachers, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in my role at Karuna, I've provided spiritual care to many families over the years that I've been there. So in this presentation, I've included some of what I've learned about living and dying from these very inspirational people. I wanted to talk today about why we fear death, what do we really know about death and dying, and then how death can actually transform and enrich our life. So firstly, why do we fear death? I think it's fair to say that both as a society and as individuals, we find death a very uncomfortable topic. It's something we don't want to talk about, we don't want to think about it, and especially we don't ever want to have to face it. So the most common attitude we find to death and dying is one of avoidance, and even at an unconscious level, denial. In fact, it's still a socially taboo topic, and you do find that people really do prefer to talk about politics and religion. So where does this closed-minded approach to what is in fact a natural part of our life, where does that come from? We were very fortunate a few years ago when His Holiness the Dalai Lama visited Karuna. And he said, when he spoke to our clients and staff, he explained how it's our mind and our cognitive capacity that can actually work against us. He explained that everything that has a beginning has an end, but not everything experiences fear and pain when it comes to that end. Non-sentient things like plants, mountains, galaxies and oceans, they have no feeling or cognitive capacity. So when they come to an end, there's just the end, there's no feeling. Buildings, for example, don't experience fear and pain when they're being demolished, just those of us around. Sentient beings, on the other hand, have feeling, and we have different levels of cognitive capacity. So we experience fear and pain. His Holiness said human beings particularly have a higher level of cognitive capacity. We have a higher level of intelligence, for example, than animals. We have memory, we have empathy, and we can think about and visualize or imagine the future. So all of this means that we experience additional psychological and emotional problems when we face the end of life. We feel greater anxiety and uncertainty. We feel more intense grief, and we experience these things over a much longer period of time. Many of us actually find that our fear of death impacts on our life even when we're completely healthy. So fortunately, our capacity to think, remember and vision can cause fear, but it can also be used to overcome our fear. It's just a matter of how we use our mind. I think another reason that we fear death is that we don't understand it. The physical aspect of death is something that's more easy to understand. We see aging, we know about incurable illnesses, we hear about fatal injuries and accidents, and these days we even see images of death. But on an actual experiential level, it's unknown to us. It's outside our direct experience. We haven't died yet. And even if we believe that we did in a previous life, we certainly don't remember it. Also, what we do know about death and dying tends to be distorted by our fear and our anxiety, which makes it difficult for us to think about. So it becomes an unhealthy cycle of fear, avoidance, deeper fear and stronger avoidance. But again, the good news is that this is something we can overcome. We can transform our lack of knowledge simply by increasing our understanding. So now let's look at what we actually do know about death and dying. There are many books and movies and documentaries around these days about death and dying. And these things definitely bring us a little closer to understanding it, but it's from a safe distance. It's something we observe. It's something that's happening for other people. A little closer to us are the people and the families that we actually know. These days we all seem to know someone who has died, someone who is dying, a family who's caring for a loved one, or someone who's being diagnosed with a life-threatening illness and is still waiting to find out the outcome of that. These people make death and dying so much more real for us. Their experience enhances our understanding. They let us see what courage it takes to accept what is happening, to prepare for it, to say goodbye, to explore beliefs, and to talk about the fears that people face. I once visited a young mother in hospital. She had cancer and only a few weeks to live. She was very concerned. She hadn't seen anyone die before and didn't know what it was going to be like. She had a 12-year-old son and she wondered whether it was good for him to be there with her while she died. He wanted to be, but she was concerned that it would disturb him. What she did was actually, she had a Catholic background. She wrote out her description of the place that she hoped to be reborn in, her description of heaven. And she gave that to her son and asked him to read it to her while she was dying. This not only gave incredible support to the mother, but it allowed her son to have a very active and meaningful way of being involved. I will always be amazed by the courage and the wisdom that she showed. Now, personally, I've learned a lot about dying from the Buddha's teachings. From the Buddhist perspective, what dies is the body. The mind does not die. It leaves the old body after death, and it takes rebirth in a new form. From that point of view, death is something like changing our clothes. His Holiness the Dalai Lama explained that one way to look at it is that death is also similar to deep sleep. During our lifetime, our consciousness or mind is at a certain level when we're awake. Then the continuity of that mind becomes more subtle when we're asleep and dreaming. From there it goes to an even more subtle level when we're in deep sleep. Then it goes in reverse, deep sleep to dream state to awake. Like that, at the time of death, the mind continues and goes through different levels of dissolution as it passes from one life to the next. There's a very detailed description of this dying process in the Buddhist teachings, which is based on the 4 physical elements of the body that make up the body, and it's also based on death being the separation of body and mind. So in that description, the first thing that loses power or dissolves is the earth element, and at that time there's a feeling of falling. Sometimes you might notice that when you're dropping off to sleep. And at that time there's also a vision like a mirage. Then the water element dissolves and the bodily fluids dry up and there's a smoke-like vision. The fire element dissolves and heat and digestive powers decline and there's a vision of fire sparks. Then the earth element dissolves and breathing ceases and there's a vision like the last flicker of a candle just before it goes out. So at this point, the body has stopped functioning, but the subtle levels of consciousness are still gradually dissolving. The visions that occur at this time are like white sky at dawn, then there's like the red sky at dusk, then there's a period of darkness, and finally even that dissolves and one experiences a profoundly peaceful, clear light. And we may remain in that state for some hours or days until the mind finally leaves the body. My personal experience of this was when my mother died a few years ago. Her consciousness left her body about 24 hours after her breathing stopped. After the breathing stopped, there was like a type of stillness around her, and there was some heat coming from her heart chakra. And then about 3 o'clock the next morning, which was around 24 hours later, there was like a movement, a wind. Some fluid came from her nostril, and there was no longer, when we checked, there was no longer any heat coming from her heart chakra. And these are the recognized signs of final death in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So this is from a Buddhist perspective, but in our multi-faith, multicultural society, and in a time when we have access to so much information, we have the opportunity to explore many different beliefs about death and dying, and from that we can come to our own understanding of it and then make informed decisions about how we want to live and how we want to die. So now, how can we transform our life, enrich our life by thinking about death? People who've had to face the reality of their own death say it has given them a very different perspective on life. Worldly matters and worries don't carry the same weight anymore. The world seems to be more in focus and life's priorities are much clearer. So we can all experience this same insight by training our mind. And the things we need to train our mind in are awareness of the impermanent nature of everything, awareness that our life is finite, and awareness that our life can finish at any time. The length of our life is not certain. The more familiar we become with impermanence, for example, the more aligned we are with the reality, because things are, in actual fact, changing moment to moment, and whatever begins, ends. Aligning ourselves with that reality, we find gradually that we can deal more easily with change. We don't need to cling to people and things to feel secure, and we can have more confidence and courage when we're faced with uncertainty. The second one, awareness that our life is finite, actually makes every day of our life something very precious. Even every moment becomes precious. It gives us a way of putting things in perspective when we're overwhelmed or faced with problems. It empowers us. It empowers us to be clear about who we want to be and what we want to do with our life. It empowers us to avoid what we may regret at the end of life. The last thing we want to be doing when we die is looking back and regretting what we did or didn't do when we had the chance. Also, if we do believe that there's some part of us that continues on after death, remembering the finiteness of our life fires our resolve to become the kind of person we want to be in that next life. Remembering death is finite, also enriches our relationships. Being aware of the limited time that we have together makes it easier for us to be more forgiving. It makes it easier for us to be generous and kind. We can't take things with us when we go. It also helps us to be more patient and caring, and it helps us to curb things like anger or frustration or resentment. Not just for those close to us does it benefit, but it also increases our compassion in a universal way. We're all equal in that none of us can avoid death and none of us want to die. It's something that links us all. If we're fearful of death, we can have compassion for those who have the same fear. If we've come to a place of acceptance of death, then we can have compassion for those who haven't had that opportunity as yet. The third awareness that we need is to be aware that our life can end at any moment. People die at all ages. Living with that awareness means that we actually make sure that we are prepared for our death at any time in life. At any time in life, we actually need to be at peace with who we are and how we're living. We actually need to be at peace with all of those that we have contact with We need to be able to feel genuine affection for them. And we also, I think, need to have something or someone to rely on, something to protect us or guide us. It can be very helpful to have identified this source of protection in our life and to use it with worldly problems so that our mind is very familiar with it at the actual time of death. There's one man that I visited. He was being cared for at home by his wife. And everyone, the nurses and his wife, were concerned because he didn't want to take the pain medication that had been prescribed. He was a Buddhist, and they were concerned that he was just trying to be a good Buddhist. When I spoke to him about it, he said that he wanted to have a clear mind, and we went a little deeper. What did he want to do with his clear mind? And he told me how he had been using the meditation on loving kindness throughout his life as his main practice. So while he was lying in bed, pretty much unable to move, he was still practicing that meditation, sending love and white light with every outgoing breath. And he wanted to be able to do that with his very last breath. He wanted that as his protection at the moment of his death. He didn't seem to fear dying, and if he was experiencing physical pain, it seemed that he was able to transcend it. So this preparation is extremely important. And His Holiness told us about Buddhist practitioners and how they meditate on that dying process I mentioned during their life, so that when their death occurs, they are more in control of that process. He said, the lowest level of practitioner, when they come to the end of their life, they have no joy or happiness about dying, but they also have no regret. The middle practitioner, they have no reluctance, they're quite ready to leave. The top practitioner is actually happy when dying. For them, it's an opportunity to take a new young body and return in order to benefit others. Or it may be an opportunity to be reborn in a better place, like a celestial realm, where there's less trouble and where life's more enjoyable. So in conclusion, while it's not natural to want to die, to want to leave behind everything and everyone we know, and while the death of those close to us is very sad and sometimes an unacceptable sort of tragedy, it is something that we will all go through, and like birth, it's something that we will experience ultimately on our own. It's therefore in our best interest to use the opportunities we have during our life to open our mind to this subject of death, to increase our understanding of it, and to make use of it to live freely and with purpose, and eventually to experience a peaceful and perhaps even a blissful death. That option is there for us if we can change our mind about dying. Thank you.